The wind bit through Officer Daniels' uniform as he stood at the corner of Maple and Fifth, steam rising from his paper coffee cup. It was just after 6:30 p.m., and the winter sky had already darkened to a dusky blue. The small town was beginning to wind down, lights flickered on in shop windows, and families hurried home, bundled against the cold. His shift was nearly over, and he was thinking about dinner and the warmth of his apartment. That's when he saw her. A little girl stood alone in front of Miller's grocery, her feet half buried in a patch of slushy snow. She wore a threadbare pink coat 2 sizes too small and a mismatched pair of mittens. Her cheeks were flushed red from the wind, and her thin legs shook just slightly with each gust. Most striking, though, were her eyes, wide, deep brown, and filled with something Officer Daniels couldn't quite name. Fear? Worry? Determination? She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She was just waiting. He approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "Hey there," he said gently, crouching to her eye level. "Are you okay? Are you lost?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked up at him, really looked, as if searching his face for something only she would know how to find. Finally, in a voice so small he almost missed it, she said, "Can you follow me home?" It wasn't a question. It was more like a plea disguised as a request. No panic. Just a quiet urgency that pulled at something deep in him. Officer Daniels blinked. "Is someone hurt?" he asked, concerned. The girl shook her head. "Not hurt. Just cold. And hungry. My brother's waiting." He looked around, wondering where her parents were. No adult seemed to be nearby. Cars passed. A dog barked in the distance. Life was moving on as usual, but for this girl, the world had stopped in front of a grocery store she likely couldn't afford to enter. "Where do you live?" he asked gently. She pointed down the street. "Not far. But it's dark now, and I was scared to go back alone." "You're the only one who stopped." That last sentence hit him like a punch to the chest. He stood up slowly, finishing the last sip of now-cold coffee and dropping the cup in a nearby bin. "All right," he said, giving her a small smile. "Let's go. Lead the way." She didn't smile back. Instead, she turned on her heels and started walking without hesitation. She had done what most adults struggle to do, asked for help. And Officer Daniels, whose job it was to protect and serve, felt the sudden weight of how much that really meant tonight. What he didn't know then was this wasn't just a walk home. It was the beginning of a story that would leave an entire town in tears, and restore a kind of faith the world too often forgets. The little girl led Officer Daniels through streets he'd driven countless times. But now, every step felt heavier. They passed quiet homes glowing with the soft light of evening, curtains drawn, dinner tables full, children's laughter drifting through insulated walls. But her pace never slowed. She didn't glance at the warmth she was missing. She just kept walking, her small boots crunching through icy patches of sidewalk. After about 6 blocks, they turned onto a narrow, unlit street. At the very end stood a house so weather-beaten it barely looked livable. Shingles were missing from the roof. A window was cracked and patched with cardboard. The porch light flickered like a candle struggling to survive the wind. She stopped at the bottom step and looked up at him. "This is it," she said simply. Daniels hesitated, scanning the surroundings. No car in the driveway. No signs of adult presence. His instincts prickled. She opened the front door without a key. It creaked loudly on its rusted hinges. He followed her inside. The air was cold, almost colder than outside. The heat was clearly off, and the walls were bare. No pictures. No decorations. Just the smell of dust, cold air, and something else, something like neglect. The living room had only one piece of furniture, a torn-up couch missing one leg, propped up by a stack of phone books. But on the floor, in a pile of blankets that barely covered him, was a tiny boy. Maybe 2 years old. His cheeks were pale. his lips slightly blue. The girl knelt beside him and placed a hand on his head. He's been sleeping a lot. I think his fever's gone down. Daniels took a breath, steadying himself. Where's your mom or dad? The girl's eyes lowered. Mommy got sick a few weeks ago. She said she was going to the hospital but she never came back. He crouched down beside her, heart pounding now. And your dad? I don't know him. Mommy said he left before my brother was born. The weight of her words hit hard. She had been surviving on her own. No electricity. No food in sight. No adult in reach. And yet, this little girl had held it all together. Feeding her brother with what little she could. Wrapping him in blankets. Braving the cold to find someone she thought might help. How long have you been alone? He asked quietly. She paused, then answered with something more heartbreaking than numbers. We ran out of soup 2 nights ago. That's when I knew I had to find someone. Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. He reached for his radio and called dispatch, voice shaking just slightly. 10-4, I need child services and medical over here ASAP. We've got 2 minors, no guardian on site. As he waited, he took off his coat and draped it over the little boy, gently tucking it around his shoulders. The girl watched, eyes filled not with fear, but something closer to relief. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she wasn't alone anymore. By the time paramedics arrived, the toddler had been gently lifted onto a stretcher and wrapped in thermal blankets. His temperature was low, but the medics said he'd be okay. The little girl, her name was Sophie, as Officer Daniels had finally learned, refused to leave his side. As they loaded him into the ambulance, Daniels crouched next to her again. You're incredibly brave, Sophie, he said. You did the right thing. She nodded quietly, clutching a worn-out stuffed bunny that looked like it had been stitched back together by small hands more than once. Her face didn't show relief, not yet. It was as if she was waiting for someone to tell her this wasn't real, that this kindness would vanish like a dream. But it didn't. That night, Daniels didn't clock out. Back at the precinct, he shared Sophie's story with the other officers, thinking maybe someone could help. He didn't expect what happened next. One officer walked over and placed $50 on the desk. Buy them groceries. Another opened his locker and pulled out a thick coat his daughter had outgrown. She's gonna need this. A dispatcher teared up and offered a crib her baby had just aged out of. Word spread fast. Within hours, a pile of donations formed at the station: clothes, diapers, blankets, toys, even a brand new stroller. But it didn't stop there. By morning, the local diner had promised hot meals delivered to wherever Sophie and her brother ended up. A retired nurse offered to help with the toddler's care. Someone from City Hall called in a favor and arranged temporary housing at a nearby shelter that took in children. Then, perhaps most remarkably, a young couple, unable to have children of their own, stepped forward to begin the foster process. They didn't even hesitate. Daniels visited Sophie that afternoon at the hospital. She sat beside her brother's bed, reading from a picture book a nurse had given her. She looked up and smiled for the first time. Is he going to be okay? She asked. He's going to be just fine, Daniels said gently. And so are you. She blinked, unsure how to believe him. He knelt beside her and pulled a folded paper from his pocket. I want to show you something, he said. He unfolded the note. It was a list, names of every person who had helped since she walked up to him the night before. See all these people? He said. They're rooting for you. They're here because you were strong enough to ask for help. Sophie looked down at the names, tracing her finger across the page as if memorizing each one. You're not alone anymore, he added. And in that quiet, sterile hospital room filled with machines and beeping monitors, something remarkable happened. Sophie finally let herself cry. Not from fear. Not from hunger. But because, for the first time in her life, she felt safe. And in that moment, the entire world seemed to shift for 2 children who had almost slipped through the cracks, until kindness caught them. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, casting warm rays onto the polished wooden benches. Sophie sat beside her new foster parents, wearing a clean blue dress and the pink coat she had received from the officer at the station. Her little brother, now healthy and full of energy, rested in her lap, clutching the same worn-out stuffed bunny. Across the room sat Officer Daniels, in uniform but with his heart on his sleeve. He hadn't missed a single moment since that night, not a hospital visit, not a meeting with social workers, not even this hearing. Judge Harrison, a woman known for her no-nonsense demeanor, looked over the case file one last time. "This is highly unusual," she began, adjusting her glasses. "No school reports. No child services contact. No missing persons report. These children simply fell through the cracks." The room fell still. Then, she turned her attention to Sophie. "Young lady," the judge said, her tone softening, "can you tell me why you walked up to a police officer that night?" Sophie sat up straighter. She glanced at Daniels, then at her foster parents, then back at the judge. Her voice was quiet but clear. "Because I knew someone good would listen." The courtroom was silent. Even the court reporter paused her typing. Sophie continued, "I didn't want to get anyone in trouble. I didn't know how much longer we could wait. My brother was really cold. And I remembered my mommy once said that police help people who are lost. So I thought, maybe they'd help people who are stuck too." Judge Harrison looked down quickly, composing herself. "I see," she said, voice cracking just slightly. "Well, Sophie, what you did, asking for help, that was braver than most adults ever manage. And thanks to you, a whole community came together." She glanced toward Officer Daniels. "And thanks to you, officer, for seeing what others didn't." Daniels nodded, visibly holding back emotion. With a soft smile, the judge placed her hands on the bench. "Effective today, the court grants temporary custody of Sophie and her brother to the Johnson family, pending adoption approval." Sophie looked up in disbelief. Her new mom reached for her hand. Her new dad gently placed an arm around her shoulders. And her little brother giggled, unaware of the weight of what had just happened. As the courtroom cleared, Daniels knelt down beside Sophie. "You saved your brother's life," he said, eyes shining. "And you reminded a lot of grown-ups what courage looks like." Sophie hugged him tight. No words. Just the deep, unspoken gratitude between a little girl and the man who had chosen not to look away. Outside the courthouse, snow began to fall again. But this time, Sophie didn't shiver. This time, she walked into the cold with a family beside her, a future ahead of her, and a town behind her. Forever changed by the quiet strength of a child who simply asked someone to follow her home.